Uduak Amimo, and this is Fearless. As Executive Director of Twaweza, Aidan Eyakuze regularly commissions polls on social issues and trends across East Africa. One of those polls showed an erosion in the popularity of the late Tanzanian President John Magufuli, and the publication of those results unleashed the wrath of his administration. Aidan, thank you for joining me on Fearless. I'd like to understand your early life. But before we get into that, for people who might be unfamiliar with the details of your recent troubles, please give us a recap of what happened.
Okay, thank you, Uduak. It's so nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me for this conversation. So let me start a bit of background. I joined Twaweza in May 2015 as Executive Director. And in just a few months later, it was election time in Tanzania. We did a poll, a public opinion poll, to gauge what voters were going to do come October 2015. And at that time, the late President Magufuli was the candidate for the first time. We polled. He had a very fierce rival in Edward Lowassa, who was formerly of the ruling party and joined the opposition. So we did this poll, and it came out showing 65% in favor of the late President Magufuli, and about 20% in favor of 25% for Edward Lowassa. Now, because the atmosphere was very pro-opposition at that time, at least in the urban areas, we were vilified. I was vilified for showing that citizens were likely to vote President Magufuli in and maintain the ruling party in power. Fast forward to a year later, so President Magufuli has been elected. We do another poll. We would do these every year. And his popularity rate, if you remember that time, it was, what would Magufuli do? He was doing some pretty exciting things for an African president, fighting corruption, firing people in public.
Africans were asking for him to be president of Africa.
Exactly. So we did a poll, and in 2016, his popularity was up at 96%, very, very, very high indeed. We repeat the exercise again in 2017. And by then, things had started to look a little bit different in terms of his approach to governance, including banning political rallies and harassing the opposition became the order of the day. His popularity had fallen then from 96 to 71%. So it was going in reverse. After that, we did yet another one. This is 2018. We found that the popularity, not just the president, but the parliamentarians and councillors were falling. But the big number that caught the headlines was, of course, the presidential approval rating, which had gone now from 71 to 55%. So it was this really steep decline over 3 years. And at that point, I think things had changed quite significantly in Tanzania in terms of freedom of expression. And the government felt that maybe this kind of data and public opinion oughtn't be in the public domain. So that month, we published the data in July. I went on a couple of work travel visits outside the country. When I came back on about the 22nd of July, I was summoned to the immigration officers. I dutifully went, and was told that they're going to investigate my citizenship and that they wanted my passport. So I hadn't carried my passport on that first visit. They said, come back tomorrow with the actual physical document. And I was told, even if you don't come with it, we're going to cancel it anyway. So you can keep a useless document. So I thought, wow, this is quite serious. It's taking a serious turn. In the meantime, the Council for Science and Technology had written us a letter, a very sharp one, demanding where we'd gotten the permission to run a political poll or any research whatsoever. Where was our research permit? We answered them. We were perfectly within our rights and within the law to do the research that we've been doing for ages prior to that. And then that letter was leaked from the COSTECH. And we were accused of leaking it. We said, no, it's not something that we did. So we saw that funny games were being played. However, my passport was taken. I was banned from traveling for quite a while. And I had to fight quietly in the courts to get my rights, my freedom of movement back, which happened about 2 years and almost 9 months after that. So just a couple of months ago, I was able to get a new passport and travel outside the country again.
Thank you, Aidan. So tell me, what kind of child grows up to be the person who gets on the wrong side of government and then sues that government?
A child of parents who were career civil servants. My father was a doctor, my late father. He passed away about 5.5 years ago at the age of 85. He was a doctor, one of Tanzania's first doctors at independence. My mother was an educator, and both of them worked in public service, both for the government of Tanzania and for the UN system, all their entire careers. They never ventured out into business or the private sector. So they instilled in myself and in my siblings a really deep sense of civic and public duty. And I think my father also experienced a little bit of adverse publicity way back when I was a toddler in 1971 or 72, when he too was defamed in the press in Tanzania, and he chose to sue them. He sued them and won. And remember, Uduak, this is in 1971-72. Tanzania is a strong, staunchly socialist one-party state. And of course, all newspapers are owned by the government. So he sued the government and won because the reporters couldn't substantiate the accusations of nepotism and corruption that they had meted upon him. So from that context, we were brought up with a sense of civic duty. Then they sent us to a school in Swaziland, which was essentially founded as a protest against apartheid in South Africa in 1962. It was, So you can imagine the kind of air we breathed in idyllic Swaziland. But the ideological air and the training there was all about social justice. It was all about doing your best to promote the dignity of your fellow man, person, woman, girl, whatever. So that was really instilled in myself, and again in my younger siblings, who we all went to that same school. So it just felt completely.
This is Waterford.
This is Waterford, Kamhlaba, Swatini now. So it felt completely natural to stand up. Not necessarily fearless. I like the name of your podcast. It was very fearful indeed, but it just felt like the right thing to do when you're bullied, to stand up and say, "Excuse me, I don't think I like to be bullied."
Right. So if we could find your teachers, the principal, would they be surprised that you got in trouble with the government and that you sued the government?
I think some of them might be, because I was, and I hope I still am, quite an affable, happy kind of fellow. I don't anger easily. I don't shout and kick and scream. I don't express myself in that sort of seriously assertive way. So I think they probably would be surprised. My mom said I was a happy baby. My kindergarten teacher said I was, also gregarious, but likes to read and be curious about what was going on around me. So I think some of them would be surprised that I would be, standing up and suing the government. Yeah.
So you're telling us basically that in your family, you're taught to stand up for yourselves, not to accept bullying. You're then sent to, a social justice-based, anti-apartheid school. But there are people who are listening to this who might think, yes, you're bold, you're courageous, you're fearless. And then others might think, actually, this is a product of privilege and entitlement. How do you see yourself?
Let me be honest. I think there is a part of it which is a product of privilege. Entitlement, I don't know. These two things are different. You can be privileged without being entitled. So I think it is a product of privilege. We had this amazing upbringing where, because my parents were both, professionals, we would discuss a whole bunch of things from very young age. I will never forget when my father and mother were going to move to Congo, Brazzaville. I think it was 1977 or 78. So I was eight years old. They actually sat us down, me and my two siblings, 8, 7, and 6, and said, right, you have a choice. You can either come with us and go to school in French, or you can stay here in Tanzania and go to school in a boarding school in English. And I'll never forget that they actually gave us a choice. Now, it may have been an impression that I got, but it felt like a real decision that we were being asked to make. We decided to stay in Tanzania. So we grew up in a family where things were most things were up for debate and discussion. And we really had a chance to test our burgeoning young ideas and ideals on our parents, and they listened to us and they challenged us back without shutting us down or belittling the interrogation and the inquiries that we were making about things. So that was really quite special to get the sense that your ideas are taken on merit rather than on their provenance. You're too young, you're too small, you're too this, you're too that, and so therefore you don't count. We never grew up. That has not been my experience. So if in the nuclear family, that is the experience of how you explore the world that I went through, it just felt completely natural to do it in the bigger universe. So I don't think it is privilege. Entitlement. So there is a particular privilege, which is a non-financial privilege. It's a kind of privilege that parents can give their children by listening to them and interrogating with them, authentically and genuinely. And I think it results in just wonderfully well put together young people.
So, look, we're speaking. You're back in Dar after spending a week in Kampala. Was this your first trip since getting your passport back?
It was my first work trip. The very first trip I took was a family one. I went to Swaziland to get my two daughters back from Waterford, back to Tanzania for school. This COVID travel made me nervous. Could they do it on their own? I think that was just an excuse to do. I think I just wanted to go and see them and fly back.
But for 3 years, you've not been able to leave Tanzania.
That's right. Yeah. For about almost 3 years, I had not been able to leave the country. So Uganda was my first official work trip. Twaweza has an office there with these amazing people that I work with. We have an office in Kenya and headquarters in Tanzania. And I would make it a habit prior to the travel ban to visit at least twice, maybe 3 times a year to those offices. So I hadn't seen them for a long time. They kept coming to Tanzania for meetings, and I would see them on Zoom and this kind of thing. It just wasn't the same. So it was very nice to be.
So look, Aidan, you and I are both privileged in the sense that we have had the good fortune to participate in leadership programs designed to build the capacity of leaders on the continent. You're supposed to be a good guy. Okay, this is what I'm hearing from you. Social justice, fight the powers, stand up to bullies. How jarring was it to find yourself on the wrong side of the state?
It was terrifying, Uduak, at one level. It was surprising to find oneself so vilified in that sort of subtle way, with the state sending a message out there that if you do these kinds of things, you are unpatriotic and maybe not worthy of the Tanzanian citizenship. That part of it was very terrifying. It was not something. It's not something that we seek. There's a wonderful Swahili word or 2 words. Uchochezi, those are inciters, or uchokozi, those are agents provocateurs. Provokers. It's not something that we seek on purpose. So when you are labeled with those epithets, it becomes really quite terrifying. Suddenly, the word activism can take a very almost an insulting tone, and at the same time a threatening tone. If someone calls you an activist and they're from the state, you wonder what next they're going to do to you. Maybe arrest you, incarcerate you, put you away. So it became quite frightening at that time. And so I found myself really taking a bit of a step back and beginning to calculate: how long is this going to go on for? Is it going to get worse? How do I prepare myself if it is going to get worse? And then what's going to happen to my family, with my family, both nuclear and broader? So you start really asking how much you will be able to withstand, if the pressure and the heat is turned up. So it was quite frightening.
Okay, you talk about frightening, you talk about it being terrifying. Take us through that. How did that manifest for you? Did you, could you not sleep? Did you put on weight? Did you lose weight? Did you, stop talking to people? What was that like, being in this, terrifying space?
you become paranoid. That's one of the first ones. You begin to just wonder who is listening to you, following you, in visiting your office. I mean, we had a couple of strange sort of visitors come to the office to ask for work. Somebody who came claiming he was doing a PhD in journalism, who couldn't really string a coherent sentence together, And I thought, wow, this sounds very strange. Or you'd get some of our documents. Actually, even prior to my travel ban, our polls had made their way to the ruling party headquarters. And I said, how did that get there? So you got to wonder what's going on in terms of information. So that's one. Secondly, suddenly you start getting emails from sort of human rights defenders around the world, telling you, if you need some assistance in terms of protecting yourself, please let us know. In fact, one even suggested in a phone call that, there are ways we can get you out of your country without using a passport. And I went, wow, this is the world you only watch on movies, and suddenly becomes part of your own life. But the paranoia was the first one. I like people. I like being with people, talking to people, feeling free to express myself and to listen and to challenge. That all sort of disappeared because you don't know. I didn't know how safe that was anymore. The other one is a sense of, so what do I do now? Do I cow myself? Do I bow to that pressure? Do I shut up? How do I continue leading this organization and these people who are all looking to me for some kind of clue as to, so what do we do institutionally if our executive director is constrained in this sort of way? So quite apart from the fear and the paranoia, I actually had to put on a very strong, brave face. And it is an act to a large degree, especially in the early days, August, September, October 2018. You were putting on a show so that your comrades, your co-workers, family, immediate, my wife and children, don't see me experiencing this undue stress, because then they get worried, and so it multiplies. So yeah, I put on, you put on this, we shall get through this, it's not as bad as it looks, and everything has a beginning and an end. Meanwhile, around me, people are getting arrested, people are disappearing, people's organizations are being shut down, bank accounts being frozen. And I keep thinking, when is that next going to happen to me? How will I handle being summoned to a police station or, being taken from the office? Thankfully, none of that happened. But, the brain, the imagination can be also quite terrifying. So there was a helplessness around that. And so as clock ticks and my colleague at work said, why don't you talk to a lawyer? He might have a thing or two to advise you, which I did. And then they said, there's actually a limited time period in which you can seek what they call an administrative review, where the lawyers can look and the courts can review a government decision and see whether it was correct or not. He said, you have to decide whether you're going to do that. After, and it was, I think by then September, he said, after November, you'll be time barred. The deadline's over. So you have to decide now whether you're going to do that. And I said, wow, now this takes it up another notch. Here I am, an individual suing the government of a President Magufuli. That is not it's not a walk in the park. But so I mulled over that, and I remembered my father's own experience with suing. And I said, maybe I should do that. He did it. How do I explain to my daughters that I did nothing when this was happening and it was unjust? And what does that mean for their own sense of citizens of Tanzania? So I took the decision. It was a tough one. But then after making that decision to actually seek administrative review, sue the government, suddenly I felt much calmer. You know why? Because then you've handed over your situation to a due process. It could take long, but it is in process. The alternative was to try and find somebody or listen to the advice I was hearing from quote unquote friends or connections. They knew people who could talk to people who could talk to the president, maybe, and then things could become much easier for me to get my passport back. I remember asking one of them, so what do I have to do in return? He said, well, you can just stop being so critical, just, a few things, some things just don't need to be said. Just tone down, what you're saying. And I thought, but I haven't said anything insulting or insightful or provocative. I mean, I'm presenting numbers from a research through a very well-known methodology. So why would I sell my soul and essentially completely destroy the essence of my job as a leader of this organization? So I thought to myself, I think that price is too high to pay to go down that negotiated route. So when I handed it over to the court system, I just suddenly felt, okay, now it goes due process. I can continue doing hopefully what I can do with a little bit more care. So the sense of fear after 4 or 5 or 6 months, having made that decision, actually melted away slowly. And I stopped being paranoid. Careful, yes, but paranoid and stressed. That sort of diminished significantly.
To what extent, Aidan, were your friends and family able to support you, understand these tribulations? Did you find that, people were feeling the need to keep their distance from you so that your, trouble doesn't rub off on them? Or did you find that there was a core of people standing, walking with you, walking through that valley with you?
There were. First of all, my amazing wife, she's very calm. She just said, "This too shall pass." She would say that quite a bit, But she also said, "Be thankful. There are worse things happening to other people, So be thankful. At least you are safe. You are healthy. You are well. You're with us." So that really kept me going. That she didn't panic, and so I didn't need to panic about that. My siblings, the ones who are with me in Tanzania, my sister, I have a younger sister who lives in the United States. They're also all very supportive. I've got a younger sister who writes in the East African.
We've seen her writing, and she's kind of like you.
I mean, she writes just brilliantly, She really gets to the heart and the essence of a matter. And she's also, maybe even in more intense ways, a real social justice campaigner, and she would write sort of gently, and we would have conversations about what all of this means. But I got a sense from her and my siblings that they were 150% behind me. They didn't push, but they also didn't panic or were frightened, unless, of course, they were also hiding that from me. My mom was worried. My mom was really worried about that. And she would worry about sometimes what my sister was also writing in the press, But she's of that generation where I think you don't really necessarily stand up to the state when he's doing things. Although she did as a university student. So I had to tell her, Mom, your husband sued Nyerere's newspapers, and you also were accused of demonstrating when you're in the University of Dar es Salaam. So this just feels like it's natural. Going and seeking this government, this court review of a government decision. So I think over time she became slightly less worried, and then again put her deep faith to work in prayer, and just supported me. The people who sort of kept a distance weren't necessarily sort of my friends. It was more the work counterparts we would have in government, who found it really quite challenging to pick my calls and to be seen with me in Dodoma and this kind of thing. So I also gave them that space because I didn't want to jeopardize their own situations by insisting in being their presence and working with them. So no, I had a core, my immediate family, my wife and kids, and then my siblings and my mom. And then there were lots of friends who would send me messages and this kind of thing. So they kept me going very nicely.
You talk about your kids, your daughters, and wondering what you would say to them if you didn't challenge the injustice that was being meted out on you. But did you at any point wonder, what have you done to these children? What position are you putting? Because the mind, you go through all sorts of things. So are you looking at them and thinking, am I making life difficult for you?
Do you know, that didn't come up very much. It may have been a fleeting thought, but I didn't dwell on it. Because Uduak, I've got this disease. I'm an eternal optimist, you see. I really am an eternal optimist, a pragmatic optimist. So I would look for ways to try and resolve the situation in a principled manner. And so I thought to myself, as long as they saw me doing that and standing up to intimidation in this particular way, then I think I'm sending the right message to them, regardless of what the outcome is. Of course, I was hoping for a good outcome. I was certainly hoping that nothing worse would happen. Those fears of being kidnapped or arrested and charged or put in jail, I was hoping deeply that was not going to happen. But that set that aside, that I wanted them to see that we were doing something and not just sitting and hoping for some miracle or somebody's largesse to improve the situation.
Right. So, Aidan, look, you're a trained economist, and it kind of makes sense, given the background you describe, your parents, the schools that you went to, that the work you do now, working on the expansion of civic space and open government, would follow. But this sort of work, anything to do with civil society, is typically demonized by governments, particularly in Africa, although we don't have a monopoly on that, certainly not anymore. You sit on international boards, so clearly there must be a sense, that you're doing the bidding of white people, of Western governments. How did that perception impact you, your work, your family?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is a very prevalent accusation that those of us who are working to promote fundamental freedoms of, those basic ones, the three basic ones: association, assembly, expression, are working for some Western interest. And I often thought, where did this come from? When South Africa was under the thumb of apartheid and they were fighting for exactly the same things, the whole world was in their favor, right? Nobody, Nyerere, Mugabe, all of the Southern African countries were on
the frontline states,
promoting those three things, So, and remember, I was in Swaziland towards the dying days of that regime, and I never, ever have accepted the premise that those fundamental values are, reserved or emerge from a particular part of the globe and are not relevant to others. So I brush it off. I brush off those accusations. And the people making the accusations, most in our countries, all of them largely enjoy the freedom to express themselves, the freedom to associate with who they choose to, the freedom to assemble in forms of companies and other businesses to make oodles of money, right? So they're enjoying those same ideas. And yet they tell you, no, democracy is not for us. What they mean is the mechanics of choosing who leads you and getting rid of them, they don't like. That's what is meant. But the broader underlying principles of universal human rights, I think those ones they would share with us are fundamental, and they're worth defending. It's just that they may not stick their neck out or put their money where their mouth is in terms of defending those fundamental principles. So I don't buy that. I don't buy that premise at all.
So therefore, you don't take it on. It doesn't affect your work. It doesn't disturb you at all.
No, it doesn't. Because you see, the other thing is when you speak to our own governments at various levels of civil servants, they appreciate it. When I didn't have my passport, I remember speaking to a permanent secretary at the airport. Again, we landed in Dodoma. We were on the same plane. And he had just gotten his bag. I was waiting for mine. And he passed by me, slowed down and whispered and said, "Keep doing what you're doing." This is a permanent secretary in the Magufuli administration. And I thought, well, then, this is a good thing. a couple of months earlier, I met a young person in Arusha at a conference talking about decentralization policy for the country. And he pulled me aside and said, "You have no idea how many people are behind you. Us young people are seeing what you're doing, and we really, really appreciate the fact that you're standing up for our rights as you stand up for your own." And so these all came to me as a bit of a surprise, because I wasn't a mobilizer, a rabble rouser, or one, building a political base. So when you hear from completely different spectrums of Tanzania society that what I'm going through seems to be worth the fight, then it just embeds in me how embedded those principles are of human rights and those fundamental freedoms are. Yeah, so it just seals for me the conviction that everybody wants these things. Everybody. They just maybe are too scared to articulate it, or don't quite know how to articulate it, but everybody wants those.
So clearly some insights from the experience, but what else did you learn from this period and tussle with the government?
Gosh, I've learned many, many things. First of all, from a personal point of view, how do you handle this situation? I think the first one is to whether you believe it or not, whether you feel it or not. Actually, the word is whether you feel it or not. You have to be able to portray a sense of calm and equanimity. Because then that tends to calm those around you who you depend and rely on to support you, or you might be leading. So having a sense of calm in the eyes of others is really important. Secondly, having a sense of humility. That sometimes things happen that you cannot control, and as leaders. And in this African context, we tend to think that we can control a lot of things, a lot more than we actually can. So if we can just humble ourselves to the fact that stuff happens, life goes on, be observant about what's going on so that you can respond, or maybe proactively respond, but don't expect that you're going to be able to manage everything in a direction that you want it to go. Third is that when you're up against, and I'll talk about governments really here, because governments are very large institutions on our continent. There are actually very many people inside that system who support, believe in what it is that you're doing on the outside. They understand that what you are promoting has an impact on them and their families as well, a positive impact, the ability to really be free as citizens in their own countries. So look for allies amongst those people. Protect them, but look for allies who will be able to tell you, work with you quietly, advise you, support you, all of these things. So we did that. We looked for allies in government. This is professionally speaking. The fourth thing is, as far as possible, avoid being partisan, avoid being I'm looking for the word here, vengeful in that kind of way. I'm receiving this, so I'm going to give it back. I think that can sometimes assuage our emotional beasts, but they're hardly ever productive. They're hardly ever productive in trying to deal with the situation. And always be ready to talk to your detractors, your abusers, or whatever it is. Just be ready to have that conversation, because it's amazing actually how much power you have. I realized amazingly how much power one gets when one stands for principle. States are terrified. Repressive states are terrified of people who stand up for principle. And so I learned that there's a great deal of moral power in the kind of work that we do, as long as that it is done with integrity, with transparency, with authenticity.
So look, I'll ask you to reflect on those lessons and how we apply them to rebuilding a just and sustainable world in a minute. But first, I'm curious, because these troubles are also taking place, as the COVID pandemic takes hold across the world. And a lot of the work you do is based on data, evidence. And until recently, the Tanzanian response to COVID seemed to be based on anything but data. So what is this doing to your professional mind and the workings of Twaweza as you're looking around you?
It was very, very challenging to have a rational conversation about a pandemic that was just raging around the world and around us and inside the country. It was very difficult. But I think we took the view that we have to find a way to engage with the narrative and change the narrative in clever ways, in creative ways, so that the conversation would continue based on rationality, right? So while the official position was either that we don't have it, we've defeated it through prayer and fasting, or that we're protecting ourselves through the steaming and traditional remedies. We didn't, again, back to not being vengeful, we didn't necessarily downplay all of that. We just said there are also these other things that you do: social distance, mask, and sanitize. And so we would promote quietly on the social media that particular narrative as a counterpoint to what the official story was. But it did force us to really step back and think that, you know what, data doesn't actually convince Uduak. Stories convince. People are changed by stories, not numbers. So we have started and are continuing to really find a better way of communicating these important things that we're promoting through stories, human interest stories. So we're working with media, and not necessarily around COVID, because that's a subject that you didn't really talk about until more recently, but around things like the rights of girls to go back to school after being, made pregnant when they're still young. So we would tell stories about this. We would tell stories about citizens really getting together and demanding that their local government finish a school that they had built and had been sitting there for 9 years without a roof. Again, these are the stories that tend to inspire others, and we want to spread them out. We supported 2 young men who did a really beautiful, I think it's a 40-minute film about a young girl who was forced into marriage, and promoting their work. We're working with women who work in the marketplace, supporting them to mobilize and to crystallize their own demands, agenda for local government authorities who run all of our municipal markets, right? To improve the conditions where they have to work, with such basic things such as, let's have a room where we can go and nurse our infant children without leaving our stores in the market and going all the way home and wondering who to leave there to look after our goods and our assets. So I give you these examples to show you that we decided to become very pragmatic about promoting those very important issues of citizen agency, the ability for us to make decisions that shape our own lives, promoting voice, maybe not necessarily about COVID, but about other things such as the right to go back to school. So we became very pragmatic in our approach, while at the same time showing and saying, look, doing things rationally is the best way to achieve the results that you're after. This other way can lead to really some important unintended consequences. And then, as you know, Uduak, when the second wave essentially hit Tanzania, you could see the results in the number of people who died, prominent people who died. And I think that helped erode the credibility of the official narrative and position. And more people organically decided to be much more open about the scientific approach to protecting us from COVID. Those 3 things of SMS: sanitizing, masking, and social distancing.
So look, Tanzania has a new president, Madam Samia Suluhu, and she's taking a different approach to her late predecessor. Given your troubles under that administration, her predecessor's administration, what, if anything, has changed in the way you approach your work?
Let me put it this way. We're being cautiously optimistic that things are now going to move in a good direction. The rhetoric and the messaging from the president is powerfully different. Yesterday, she spoke to the Wazee wa Dar es Salaam, which is a tradition that all presidents have tended to do, and that speak to the Wazee wa Dar es Salaam, and set out
the elders of Dar es Salaam. Yeah,
the elders of Dar es Salaam. And she set out a very unifying kind of message. Concretely, she said, look, I'm not going to look, when I'm looking for talent to hire into my government, I'm not going to look at your party affiliations, your gender, your race, your religion. No, as long as I think you can do good for the country, you're part of the team that I want to put together. So that was very unifying. She wore a mask, in Tanzania. She wears masks in Uganda and Kenya, the two trips she's made. But she wore a mask that day. She told the young people, the old people, we're here to protect you. We have this disease. So she did not deny wearing a mask. So these things and other things are making us cautiously optimistic. Why are we cautious? Because the laws that were changed to repress civil society are still on the books. And there's some other laws. So those haven't changed. So we have to actually work much, much harder to reduce the criminalization, for example, of free expression that is in a number of our laws, to get people who are falsely accused of economic sabotage out of jail. So these things need to happen for us to be much more concrete about our optimism in the president. But I think the doors and the windows are opening. We are hopefully going to be a lot more assertive about those things. But I would like us also to be supportive of the new direction that's been taken by her, because not everybody is going to be on her side. Even government will be quiet. So we've got to make sure that she succeeds in the vision that she's beginning to put forward. And I'm personally myself, I'm a big fan of the fact that we have a woman president, a Muslim woman president, a Zanzibari Muslim woman president. I think that's a fantastic thing for Tanzania.
So look, coming back to the lessons, the insights drawn from your recent troubles, how might we apply those to the task and opportunity to rebuild a better world, given the devastation unfolding as a result of the COVID pandemic?
Okay, I think number one, we need to be very clear-eyed about the devastation that is unfolding. And some of us are wanting, I think, still to deny. Because of where we sit, we don't experience the death and the devastation and the destitution that COVID is causing. We think, I'm just inconvenienced because I can't go for my regular trip to Dubai. We need to understand the extent of the devastation that is immediate, that is visible to us. We also need to understand what I'm going to call the structural damage I think that it has done. And one of the biggest things that we're seeing in our statistics in Kenya and Uganda is the deepening inequality between the haves and the have-nots. In Kenya, the people who have suffered the greatest fall in income, everybody has, but are the urban informal sector workers, the Juakali sector. They're not going to go anywhere. They're trying to go back to the rural areas. They'll come back. Those kind of structural challenges to our social cohesion are important to understand and to begin to address directly. So number one, let's make sure we know the extent of the problem. Let's not hide or diminish that one. Secondly, as individuals or maybe as institutions, we do not have all the answers. This challenge is a systemic one. We have to find ways to really collaborate, partner, work together to solve some of these problems. Vaccines, the vaccine problem, right? They said, look, Africa doesn't have enough cold storage and cold chain and cold this to make sure vaccines reach where they're all supposed to reach. And somebody said, yeah, but, Coca-Cola and Tusker reach every corner of Kenya in a cold chain. So why can't you put vaccines in Coke trucks and beer trucks to reach those places where they're supposed to be? What I'm trying to say is that we need to think about creative solutions to begin to deal with the pandemic directly, right? And to really get ahead of the virus, because the build-up, the recovery, and the renewal that comes after that is also a monumental task. It will require for us to really partner and work closely together and creatively. Let us not be tempted by trying to claim credit for big victories, because big victories may not necessarily be there. Remember, the big victory was getting a vaccine in 9 months. But the bigger victory is in stopping the pandemic. And that's going to be important. I think the third thing is we've got to do all of this without suppressing people's fundamental freedoms, and that is also hard. So we got to be able to be open. We got to be able to be vulnerable as leaders, political and business. Otherwise, I say, you know what? I know this much. I don't know that much. Maybe you know. How can we pool our strengths together to solve the problem? But that means being open and transparent and inclusive of other people's experiences, energies, and enthusiasm to deal with this problem. We will never do it if we think that we have the solution or we have the strength, we have the resources to do it, because it cuts across. It cuts across geographies, it cuts across specialisms, it cuts across talents. So we need to pull all of that together in order to try and defeat this pandemic. Now, that all sounds appear and theoretical, right? But to bring it down sort of to the personal level is number one. As an individual, keep yourself informed. Know what's going on. Read wisely, read widely. Number two, look for people you can work with. Reach across your comfort zones and learn from people who you may not necessarily collaborate with. And number three, really be open. Really be open to the possibilities that are out there, because the world, I think, is transforming before our eyes faster than usual. But we're not going to go back to what it was before in many, many ways. So we need to be prepared. I'll finish with this. Somebody said, there are two responses to a tsunami or a very large wave. One is you get a surfboard and you surf the wave. The other one is you get a life jacket, right? At least with a surfboard, you have a chance to direct where you're going to end up on the tsunami wave. With the life jacket, the wave will take you where it wants to take you. I'm a surfboard kind of guy, not a life jacket.
No, I love the imagery of that. Look, we're drawing to a close, Aidan. You've got other things to do, but I'd like you to indulge me with some rapid fire responses. Is that okay? What's your deepest fear for yourself?
Oh, that I'll die before I reach the age of 85. I want to beat my dad. It's very selfish.
What's your deepest fear for the world?
That we shall fracture, that we shall not repair the fractures that we are causing and that have manifested themselves, that we'll continue going our separate ways. That would be terrible.
What's the last thing you did that scared you?
I like sailing, so I took my daughter out on a boat, and I'm not a very brilliant sailor, and it's a very small boat, and I took her out there. She's a good swimmer, but I thought to myself, is this, what if something terrible happens? This is just about 2 weeks ago. She wants to go sailing with me again, so I must have done something right.
Okay. Right. You've given us your insights from your troubles with the government, but tell us 3 things in your fear-busting toolkit.
3 things in my
fear-busting toolkit.
Okay. Walk through life with your eyes wide open. That's number 1. Number 2, don't take yourself too seriously. Okay. And number 3, find yourself somebody really good whom you can just let your hair down with and talk to.
Excellent. Very, very, very good. Well advised. So look, Aidan, it's been such a privilege. Thank you for honoring my invitation and for your time on Fearless. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Uduak. It's a great podcast. I look forward to listening to your other Fearless interviewees.
So Aidan Eyakuze is the Executive Director of Twaweza East Africa. Twaweza works across the region to enable children to learn, citizens to exercise agency, and governments to be more open and responsive. Aidan is a member of the Global Steering Committee of the Open Government Partnership. He also sits on the board of the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data.